You ever hear your granddad let out a word that made everyone laugh, but you didn't even know it was supposed to be a swear? Words that once shocked, scolded, or started bar fights now sound almost polite. Back then, America didn't curse like it does today. The anger was clever. The humor was hidden in the sound. Swearing wasn't about shock. It was an art form. There was a time when a man could mutter blazes under his breath and everyone knew he was furious. When calling someone a nincompoop was fighting talk. When consarn it, doggone, or dadgum could say everything without saying anything bad at all. It was the language of barns, trains, and back porches. The sound of frustration softened by manners. These forgotten swear words carried more heart than hate. They were invented by people who wanted to express the heat of life without losing their dignity. They came from coal miners, soldiers, farmers, and grandmothers. Words you won't hear in rap songs or modern movies, but you'll still find in old letters, radio shows, and the mouths of the few who remember when speech had rhythm. Tonight, we're digging up 15 of those lost American swear words. The ones that made your granddad chuckle, your grandma gasp, and your teacher pretend she didn't hear. Because sometimes the cleanest curses say the most. There was a time when swearing wasn't about shock. It was about timing. It wasn't about throwing anger like a brick. It was about shaping it, dressing it in rhythm, giving it a wink. Words had weight. They had sound. They had charm. Picture your grandfather on the porch in the 1940s. The radio's humming, the sun's going down, and something breaks. A tool, maybe, or his patience. He doesn't shout what you'd expect. He mutters something like, consarn it, under his breath, soft but sharp. You can hear the sting in it, but not the dirt. That's how Americans used to curse, with class. Consarn it was one of those words. Born in the 1800s, used in every dusty town and small church pew where people wanted to sound tough without sounding wicked. It was the kind of word you'd hear from a man fixing his tractor, or a preacher who hit his thumb with a hammer but couldn't risk his reputation. It meant frustration, disappointment, or plain human weakness, but it never crossed the line. Then there was dadgum, the southern cousin of goddamn, but without the blasphemy. You'd hear it in Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas. The sound of a man shaking his head at a stubborn mule, or a boy caught sneaking pie before dinner. Dadgum it, boy, what in thunder are you doing? It was anger softened into music, and doggone, that was American poetry. Simple, strong, and perfectly safe to say in front of your mother. Cowboys said it. Train conductors said it. Soldiers said it when they missed home. Doggone carried frustration and affection in the same breath. You could scold a friend with it, or curse your luck. It was versatile, like denim. It fit everyone. You can almost hear it now, the voices of a different America. Men in hats and rolled-up sleeves, women in aprons, kids peeking around corners. Someone spills coffee, the radio goes static, the dog runs off with a shoe, and instead of what you'd hear today, it's dad blast it, tarnation, or blazes. Blazes had power. It meant trouble. It was the heat of hell without saying the word. Where in blazes have you been? It meant you'd crossed a line. Parents used it. Teachers used it. It had the weight of authority, and tarnation? That was the Wild West. Cowboys shouting it at dusty trails, farmers muttering it at broken fences. It was an echo of damnation, but turned playful by the frontier tongue. You could hear it in every old Western film. What in tarnation is that? It meant surprise, confusion, or pure disbelief. Those words carried color. They gave people permission to express emotion without losing control. The language had boundaries, and within those boundaries, Americans built an entire world of sound. Even the funny ones had purpose. Take nincompoop. It sounds silly now, but it once had bite. It was the perfect insult for someone who couldn't take a hint or didn't know what they were doing. You nincompoop, said with a grin, but meaning every word. It was the kind of insult that could sting and still make the room laugh, or horse feathers. A word born in the 1920s jazz era. Nonsense, lies, pure foolishness. It was the sound of disbelief. That's horse feathers, meant you're full of it, but said with a smile and a tilt of the hat. It fit the rhythm of a time when people dressed sharp, talked fast, and knew how to keep humor in anger. That's what made old American swearing so human. It didn't just release anger, it shaped it. The words were tools, not weapons. You could swear and still be decent. You could curse your luck without cursing the world. In the 1930s and 40s, those words filled radio shows and movie scripts. Characters didn't need to drop bombs to sound tough. Clark Gable didn't swear, he smirked. Jimmy Stewart could express frustration with a simple confound it and make the whole audience feel it. You didn't need filth to sound real. You just needed rhythm. That's what language used to be, music. Every curse had a melody. Dad burn it. Goldarn. Dagnabbit. You could string them together and they'd sound like a song of frustration sung by farmers and dreamers alike. Think about that for a second. Every word had a story. Dadburn came from goddamn, softened over years of caution. Dognabbit was the same, turned playful by mouths that wanted to vent without offending ears. It was the creativity of a culture that wanted release, not rebellion. And the best part? Those words crossed generations. You heard them from your grandfather, then your father, then from someone who didn't even mean to say it, but did because it just felt right. They were inherited sounds, the emotional fingerprints of a time when restraint wasn't weakness. It was style. There's a warmth in those words that modern curses don't have. You could say them to a child and not feel shame. You could say them to a stranger and not cause offense. They lived somewhere between anger and affection. Imagine a small-town mechanic in 1958, hands black with grease, the engine refusing to start. He wipes his forehead, sighs, and mutters, "Dadgum thing." He's angry, sure, but it's a soft anger, one that accepts life's stubbornness. He doesn't hate the car. He just knows it's being human in its own way. That's the thing. Old swearing wasn't about hate. It was about recognition. It said, "This world is messy, but so am I." Are words like golly, gee, and dagnabbit bridged generations? They gave kids something to say when they were frustrated, gave adults a way to vent without guilt. They turned life's chaos into something you could laugh at instead of break over, and while these words have faded, their spirit still lingers. In old TV reruns, you can hear them, Andy Griffith muttering doggone, or your grandmother in a kitchen saying bless it all when she burns the biscuits. They're ghosts of language, polite yet passionate, stubborn yet sweet. That's what swearing used to be, a reflection of who we were. Tough, kind, creative, restrained. People who built houses, fixed engines, raised families, and found poetry in frustration. Maybe that's why, when you hear one of those old words today, something in you smiles. Because deep down they sound like home. Every nation has its rhythm, a heartbeat you can hear in its language. For America, that rhythm was built on grit, humor, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. You can hear it in the slang, in the sayings, and especially in the way we used to swear. Not with venom, but with wit. Not to wound, but to release. Swearing wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Think of a miner in the 1910s, deep underground, sweat dripping, the air thick. His lantern goes out. His pickaxe hits stone and snaps. He doesn't shout the harsh words we know today. He growls, "Dad blast it," and keeps swinging. That single phrase held all his frustration. But it also held control. That's what the old American temper looked like. Loud, proud, but never cruel. The words came from work, from farms, railroads, kitchens, and shipyards. When something went wrong, people didn't reach for the ugliest sound they could find. They reached for something that fit their world. Thunderation. Great Scott. Land sakes. These were phrases that came from a time when you had to keep your dignity even in your anger. Thunderation was one of the first, a polite way to bring heaven's power into your sentence without blasphemy. A preacher could say it, and so could a logger. It meant shock, surprise, even awe. You can hear it in the way it rolls off the tongue, like a storm breaking in a sentence. Thunderation, would you look at that? It gave emotion without offense. Great Scott. Carried its own weight. It was old-school astonishment, half sarcastic, half sincere. It came from 19th century soldiers and made its way into every street and movie script by the 1930s. People said it because it felt clean but strong, like tapping the table instead of slamming it. It made you sound clever, not crude. Then there was land sakes, a phrase that could only come from America's countryside. It meant everything and nothing at once. Shock, fear, joy, surprise, all wrapped into two words that sounded like home. A mother dropping a plate, a grandmother hearing gossip, a teacher catching a kid with a frog in his desk, all land sakes. Moments. It wasn't anger. It was life in motion. These were the sounds of people who worked hard and held tight. People who lived in small houses, with big feelings and no time for cruelty. And then came by thunder. The phrase of men who fixed things, fought things, and didn't have time to explain. It was the sound of American determination. By thunder, I'll get it done. It meant power and persistence without a hint of profanity. It was how you cursed at the world while still respecting it. Every one of these words came from the same place. A belief that even frustration could have character. Listen closely and you can hear the class in it. Not social class, but personal class. The kind that built communities instead of breaking them. These words lived in church pews on factory floors. And in the mouths of people who still said, "Yes, ma'am," and "Thank you kindly." They swore with grace. Take balderdash. It's British in origin, but Americans made it theirs. It meant nonsense. A polite way to call someone out without tearing them down. You could slam a politician or a salesman with a single, "That's pure balderdash," and everyone knew you'd won the argument. It was the working man's way of staying smart, and poppycock, another elegant insult turned everyday American. You'd hear it in barbershops, over poker tables, or in a father's voice when his son tried to lie about homework. Poppycock. It said, "I'm not angry, but don't insult my intelligence." The 1920s jazz age took these words and gave them rhythm. Horse feathers, applesauce, malarkey, all cut from the same cloth. Each one was a rebellion wrapped in politeness. You could dismiss a lie, a scam, or a big boast with a single word that made everyone laugh instead of tense up. Malarkey especially stuck. Joe Kennedy said it. Politicians still do. It's timeless. It means nonsense, sure, but it also means patience, a way of saying you're full of it without starting a war. The beauty of those words was that they fit America. They matched our optimism, our sarcasm, our rhythm. They made the hard days easier. You have to remember, these weren't words of luxury. They came from calloused hands and tired backs, from farmers patching fences, truckers fixing tires, and mothers trying to stretch one meal into two. Every dad blast it was earned. Every confound it was honest. Every thunderation was a spark of human endurance. Swearing was art. It was how the tired made peace with life, how the disappointed found humor, how frustration became connection. Because when someone said, "For crying out loud," everyone understood. It wasn't blasphemy. It was community. It meant we're all struggling, but we'll make it. That's what we've lost today. The creativity of anger, the poetry of frustration. Back then, people built words like they built houses. Strong, simple, lasting. Even the insults had texture. Scalawag, rapscallion, blackguard. Words that insulted but didn't destroy. You could call a man a scalawag and still share a beer afterward. It was rivalry with respect, and varmint. That was America's favorite insult for a century. Cowboys used it, farmers loved it. It meant troublemaker, pest, rogue, but with affection. You could yell, "You no good varmint?" And everyone knew it came from half a smile. These words built the American temper because they gave emotion structure. They reminded people that you could be mad and still be decent. That emotion didn't have to mean ugliness. Think about your grandparents' generation. They lived through wars, recessions, loss. But when things went wrong, their anger came out in words that still had room for kindness. That's power. That's language holding humanity together. Maybe that's why hearing dadgummit or balderdash today makes you smile. It reminds you of a time when people were proud of how they spoke, when even swearing carried dignity. The old swear words weren't just funny. They were moral anchors. They told you who you were. So when a farmer said, "By thunder," he wasn't just angry. He was reaffirming his belief that hard work could fix anything. When a grandmother sighed, "Land sakes," she wasn't just surprised. She was showing patience in chaos. When a worker muttered, "Dad blast it," he wasn't giving up. He was letting off steam so he could keep going. Swearing wasn't rebellion. It was resilience. It's strange to think that something so simple, a few old words, carried so much meaning. But maybe that's why they lasted as long as they did. They were small, but they held the soul of a country trying to stay decent even in frustration. They were the words that built America's temper. Controlled, creative, kind. There's a kind of swearing that doesn't come from rage. It comes from love. The kind your grandfather used when his favorite team lost in the ninth inning. The kind your grandmother muttered when the biscuits burned. The kind that wasn't meant to offend, just to feel. That was America once, a country that swore not to shock, but to survive. Every old swear was a pressure valve, a way to let out steam without burning the whole room. Picture a kitchen in 1954. The radio's playing Hank Williams, a pie crust tears. Your grandmother sighs, "Oh, for Pete's sake." That's it. No explosion, no cruelty. Just the sound of an ordinary day going a little wrong, softened by affection. For Pete's sake, a phrase built to replace something harsher, but said so often it became its own melody. You can still hear it in small towns, from older voices that never forgot how to keep anger gentle. Then there's "For crying out loud," another classic. You could hear it in every American home between 1930 and 1970. It meant frustration, disbelief, exhaustion, and sometimes love. When your dad came home late, when your brother tracked mud into the house, when your neighbor's car broke down again. For crying out loud wasn't about cursing anyone. It was about caring enough to be mad, and son of a gun. That one had swagger. Sailors used it first, then cowboys, then just about everyone who needed a sentence that could carry both admiration and irritation. You son of a gun could mean you scoundrel or you legend. It depended on how you said it. It was a wink disguised as a growl. These words had warmth. They lived in the middle of emotion, not too cold, not too hot. They gave frustration a heartbeat. Back then, even the insults had affection. You rascal, you scamp, you devil. None of them meant hate. They meant you cared enough to notice. The people who used them didn't want to destroy. They wanted to connect. And then came the granddaddy of all charming curses, Jiminy Cricket. Walt Disney gave it new life, but it had been around long before. It was a stand-in for Jesus Christ, born out of a desire to keep language clean in a religious country. But somehow it became more than that. It became whimsical. It turned frustration into charm. You could say it when you dropped your coffee or when you saw something incredible. Jiminy Cricket meant surprise without sin. The same went for Jumpin' Jehoshaphat, a name plucked from the Old Testament and twisted into pure American flavor. It was the sound of disbelief, joy, and humor all at once. You can imagine it shouted by a man in suspenders watching his neighbor's new car roll downhill. Jumpin' Jehoshaphat, it was the perfect middle ground between a gasp and a laugh. Even holy smokes awe born from the smell of church incense. It found its way into every lunch counter and Little League game. It was the expression of awe, of shock, of, can you believe this? Without crossing a single line. These words didn't just soften anger. They gave emotion a soul. They made frustration feel human, not hostile. And there was poetry in how Americans spoke them. The syllables stretched, rolled, hit the ear like music. For heaven's sake. Good gravy. Mercy me. Well, I'll be. They weren't words built to sting. They were words built to carry. That's the part we've lost. The rhythm of care inside the chaos. People didn't just swear to express anger. They swore to stay connected. You could stand outside a 1940s baseball field and hear a crowd of fathers and grandfathers all yelling at once. Dadgum umpire! What in blazes was that? Oh, for Pete's sake, swing the bat. Every voice frustrated but not bitter. The sound wasn't hate. It was passion, alive and shared, language-shaped community. Those words stitched together people who disagreed on everything else. Because they were safe. Because they carried respect. The best thing about old American swearing was how it could turn anger into laughter. A farmer yelling, "Consarn it!" when the cow kicked over a bucket wasn't losing his temper. He was sharing it. And when his neighbor laughed, the heat left the air. Swearing back then wasn't isolation. It was communication. It said, I'm struggling, but I'm still here. Even kids picked up the clean versions. You'd hear a 10-year-old in 1959 trip over a toy car and yell, "Aw, shucks," and everyone would smile. That was the point. You could be expressive without being ugly. Shucks and shoot were the middle ground between innocence and experience. They were the words you used when you wanted to sound grown-up, but not cross the line. They taught restraint without silence. Darn and heck were the same. Small words, huge meaning. You could say them in church, at school, or in front of your parents. And everyone knew what you meant. The genius of those old swear words is how they let you feel without falling apart. They reminded people that even anger could be graceful. Language reflected character. People wanted to sound composed, even in chaos. You could spill your coffee, stub your toe, lose your temper, but you still had pride in how you spoke. That pride wasn't arrogance. It was identity. Think about it. America was built by people who worked with their hands. They fixed things. They mended things. They built towns, families, and lives. The way they spoke matched that craft. Their words had edges smoothed by use. They weren't sharp. They were strong. Even in the wars, soldiers wrote home using these words. Letters filled with heck, shoot, and doggone. They didn't hide their pain, but they kept it human. It wasn't weakness. It was dignity. That's the heart of it all. America swore with heart because America felt with heart. Today, words cut faster. Anger runs louder. But back then, there was care in the chaos. A balance between emotion and grace. You could swear, laugh, and move on. The world didn't break because of one bad day. Maybe that's why those old phrases still sound like music when we hear them now. They remind us of a time when people talked like they meant it, not like they were performing it. They remind us that language doesn't just express who we are. It builds who we are. Those old swear words built an America that could be angry and kind in the same breath. That could yell at the sky, laugh, and get back to work. That could lose its temper and keep its soul. That's what it means to swear with heart. Some words vanish quietly. They don't die in books or headlines. They fade in the air between generations. They slip out of sentences, and nobody notices until one day you realize they're gone. That's what happened to America's clean curses. They were the language of decency, the middle ground between silence and rage. They let people show emotion without losing grace. And when they disappeared, something in us changed too. There was a time when language itself kept people kind, when frustration had a rhythm, not an edge, when the sound of anger could still carry humor. Back then, even fury had manners. Think of your grandfather sitting on the porch, watching the news on a black and white television. The world looked like it was spinning too fast already. The headlines were heavy, the gas prices high, the future uncertain. But when he swore, it wasn't cruel. He'd shake his head and mutter, "Well, I'll be." Or maybe, for crying out loud. It was frustration tied to decency, the kind of temper that still respected the world. That was the last echo of an America that believed language mattered. People forget how deliberate words used to be. You didn't just speak, you chose. The right word showed who you were. The wrong one closed doors, so even anger had boundaries. You could vent without burning bridges. You could curse your luck and still look your neighbor in the eye the next morning. When you said heck instead of hell, you were making a small promise that you cared how your words sounded to others. It wasn't weakness, it was awareness. You were saying, I'm angry, but I still respect you. It sounds small, but that's what built communities. Towns weren't just held together by fences and faith. They were held together by the way people spoke to each other. Every word had temperature. Darn was warm. Shoot was mild. Fiddlesticks was almost playful. You could express emotion without cutting anyone. That was a kind of moral technology we didn't realize we were losing, and then, slowly, the volume went up. By the 1980s, movies, music, and television had rewritten how people talked. The old language, the doggons, dadgums, for heaven's sakes, sounded outdated. Younger generations wanted words that hit harder. The country was louder, faster, angrier. The polite words didn't keep up. But something got lost in that trade. When we stopped saying dagnabit, we lost the pause that word gave us. It slowed you down, softened you. It reminded you that you were still human in your anger. But when every sentence became an explosion, anger turned sharp. It started to cut instead of calm. That's why old Americans used those words for more than manners. They were tools, small acts of control in a chaotic world. A farmer could watch his crops fail, sigh, dad blast it, and go back to work. A mechanic could bust his knuckles, growl, tarnation, and keep fixing the engine. Those words gave people distance from their own frustration. They were tiny acts of survival. It's no wonder older people still say them. The ones who lived through war, recession, and loss. They know that language isn't just how you talk. It's how you cope. When you hear an old man mutter, "consarn it," or, "well, shucks," it's not just nostalgia. It's a code. It's a memory of restraint, of self-respect, of a country that believed you could be decent even when you were mad. And maybe that's what those words really meant. Decency. America was never perfect. But its people, for a long time, tried to sound like they believed in decency. You can hear it in the letters from soldiers writing home, in the conversations between farmers, in the laughter at corner diners. Language wasn't just communication, it was character. The words you used said something about the kind of person you were trying to be. Your grandmother didn't say damn, she said darn. Your father didn't curse at the weather, he grumbled blast, hit. Your mother didn't yell at you for breaking a plate. Oh, she sighed. Heavens to Betsy, those phrases weren't weakness. They were a kind of quiet strength. A way of saying, I can be angry without being ugly. The older generation swore like they worked, carefully, deliberately, with purpose. And when they spoke, they didn't just express feeling, they preserved connection. That's why those words still live inside you, somewhere deep. You've heard them enough times that they echo when you least expect it. When you drop something, when traffic stops, when life hits you sideways, there it is, for Pete's sake. It slips out like instinct. That's not just speech. That's inheritance. Language is memory. Every time we use those old phrases, we bring back a little piece of the America that built them, a slower, kinder, sturdier place. The truth is, swearing has always been a mirror. When we swore with wit, we were clever. When we swore with heart, we were human. When we swore with decency, we were proud. Maybe that's why hearing balderdash, horse feathers, or great Scott makes you smile. They're echoes of a world where words still had weight, where tone mattered, where people knew that how you said something was as important as what you said. The language of decency wasn't about rules, it was about rhythm. A way to keep grace even when the world fell apart. And though those words are fading, they're not gone. You can still hear them if you listen. In small towns, in the mouths of old-timers, in the warmth of stories passed down. The last echo of American decency isn't on the radio, or in movies, or even in books. It's in the way people still remember how their grandparents spoke. It's in the laughter you feel when someone says, golly gee, and means it. It's in the comfort of hearing, well, I'll be, from someone who's seen it all and still finds wonder left in the world. The words may have vanished from daily speech, but they live in memory. They live in you, because deep down, you remember what it felt like when language carried kindness, when people swore with heart, not hate. When decency wasn't weakness, but wisdom. Maybe that's what America needs again. Not silence, not politeness for its own sake, but the courage to speak with care, to let even our frustration show grace. Because in the end, that's what these old swear words were. A promise, a quiet one. That even when life went wrong, we'd still try to be good. And maybe, somewhere, the ocean of language is still holding them, waiting for us to remember. The words we lose are never really gone. They linger in the air, in our memories, in the way we tell stories about the people who raised us. These forgotten American swear words weren't about anger. They were about understanding. They gave voice to frustration without surrendering to it. And maybe that's what we're missing now. The warmth in the words, the humor in the hardship. The small proof that even in chaos, we still cared how we sounded to each other. Next time, we're traveling back to another lost chapter of American life. The diners, soda fountains, and jukeboxes that defined how a nation fell in love one nickel at a time. And if you want to hold on to these memories a little longer, you can join our newsletter, where we keep the small details alive, one forgotten word at a time. Because the language of decency isn't gone. It's just waiting for someone like you to speak it again.